Week 14 of the fantasy football season, and here's wide receivers start sits every matchup this week. Thursday night football, Las Vegas Raiders at the Los Angeles Rams. So Davante Adams, didn't matter if he was in Green Bay or now with the Raiders. He's one of the best wide receivers in all of pro football and fantasy football. And this week here, I know we'll probably see a lot of Jalen Ramsey on him, but I'm not going to shy away from this matchup. I think Adams has another good game. And the last few weeks here, he's been putting up monster fantasy games with 30-plus fantasy points. So he's a start this week. And Matt Collins, he's been a hit-or-miss wide receiver for the most part this season. Now in the number 2 role, obviously over there, where Hunter Renfro's been out over the last few weeks with his injuries on injured reserve. But right now, this week here in a short week, I don't think Matt Collins will do much, and he's a borderline option at best. Now to the Rams side of things, no one's really doing anything at the wide receiver position. I know Powell's there, I know Skoranek, I know Van Jefferson's the number 1 guy, but I can't trust any of these guys, especially in a crucial week 14. And I just got Van Jefferson pretty much as the only guy on this list, because those other guys aren't owned and they shouldn't be guys to consider on your roster. So they all sit this week now to the Texans at the Dallas Cowboys. Brandon Cooks, I mentioned early in the week, he's a drop candidate at the wide receiver position, a guy who's banged up, not doing much. And this team at this point, they're going to play the young guys and tank it to try to get the number 1 pick in the NFL draft in the upcoming season. So Cooks is a sit. Nico Collins, I know he's had a couple decent games here and there, but this week versus a tough Dallas Cowboy defense here, I don't know if this Texan team will do much besides in garbage time. So he's a sit as well for me. Now to the Cowboys, CeeDee Lamb, he's been on fire the last month of the season, especially since Dak Prescott's come back. The numbers have gone up, and the explosive plays have gone up as well, so he's a start each and every week. And Michael Gallup, the last few weeks here, he's starting to kick things into gear, but he's not doing enough, I believe, to be a guy that you definitely start each and every week. So Gallup, I know he's getting more targets, I know he's making more plays, but this week I have him as a borderline option at best. Now to the Ravens at the Pittsburgh Steelers. We know Huntley's going to start this game most likely with Lamar Jackson out in this one here. Lamar, to be honest, he wasn't really hitting his wide receivers or getting them involved that much this season. And Lamar, he got off to a monster start the first 3 weeks of the season. But ever since then, he really hasn't done much. And right now, Tyler Huntley maybe could get these receivers going over here for this Baltimore Raven team. So this week, I got Duvernay and Robinson still as sits. I can't trust them in a big situation. And you know, Huntley plays like Lamar Jackson anywhere where he's going to run, but he definitely could get them involved. But I'm still not going to be confident in this one to start him in a division game versus Steelers team that's obviously familiar with the Ravens. And now to the Steelers side of things, Deontay Johnson, he really has not done much this season. And George Pickens, he's been an up-and-down wide receiver so far in his rookie year. So they're both borderline options. If I have better options, obviously I'm not going to start these guys. They're just too inconsistent. Obviously, it's not all their fault. We know Pickett's a rookie quarterback, and there's going to be growing pains and inconsistencies. But right now, both these guys are borderline for me. Now to the Minnesota Vikings at the Detroit Lions. Justin Jefferson, obviously the best receiver this season, pretty much in fantasy football. He's a start each and every week. And Adam Thielen, he's been a hit-or-miss type of wide receiver. I thought this season coming in, he'd be more of a consistent wideout, but that just hasn't been the case here with Adam Thielen. But this week in a good matchup versus the Detroit Lions that obviously don't stop anybody, giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. I got Adam Thielen as a start, as a flex option or number 2-3 receiver in fantasy leagues. Now to the Lions side of things, Amon St. Brown, he's been on a tear over the last couple weeks here, back to putting up those elite numbers like he did towards the end of last season. So he's a start. And this Lion offense plays great at home. On the road, it's a different story, but this week, once again, a home game here for the Lions, and he's a start. And DJ Chark, I know he's broken out over the last couple weeks, but he's still a guy I'm not going to have 100% confidence in that he's going to go out there and once again put in a big ball game. And I know this Viking defense is mediocre, not the greatest, but Chark this week, I'm going to sit him on the bench. And Jameson Williams made his NFL debut last week, and he put up the old goose egg, so you can't trust him, and he's working his way back from that ACL, so he's a sit as well. Now to the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Tennessee Titans. Christian Kirk, he's been a mainstay and one of the better wide receivers, believe it or not, in fantasy football this season. And this week here, again, a perfect number 2 wide receiver for your fantasy team, or a low-end number 1, because he's the main man in this offense. I know other guys are sprinkled in and had decent games this season, but Christian Kirk is definitely a start. Zay Jones, he's a borderline option. I know everyone was going nuts about Zay Jones and thinking he'll be doing big things week in and week out, but he's an inconsistent wide receiver, Zay Jones. So a couple weeks ago, he had 28 fantasy points, and then last week, he pretty much did nothing with Zay Jones. So he's borderline at best in a pretty tough division matchup here. Marvin Jones, he's the third receiver on this team. He's had a couple pop games here and there, but obviously, I'm not going to be playing Marvin Jones in a big situation in Week 14. He's a sit. And Traylon Burks, he's been great since he came back from injury, but now, unfortunately, he might miss this ball game after taking a monster hit and somehow holding on to the football in that ball game at Philadelphia in Week 13, suffering a concussion. But if he does play somehow, I got him as a start. And Robert Woods, it looks like he's washed up, or he just doesn't fit the scheme here of this Tennessee offense. So he's an easy sit this week because he's pretty much done nothing this whole season. Now, New York Jets at the Buffalo Bills. Garrett Wilson last week, a monster fantasy game, going over 150 yards receiving. And him and Mike White, the first 2 weeks now since White's been starting for this New York Jet team. Garrett Wilson's been a good play, but this week here, it's a very tough matchup, obviously, versus a very solid Buffalo Bill defense. And Garrett Wilson I have as a borderline option. No doubt about it, I could see him in this one go for 100 yards and a touchdown, but also I could see him go the other way, where he gets like 4 catches, 30 yards, and he didn't do anything for fantasy owners. So this week in a tough matchup, he's a borderline option. And now to Elijah Moore and Corey Davis. These two guys, they've just been inconsistent all season. They'll have a couple pop games here and there, but the only good thing about this Jet team, at least Mike White can move the football down the field, and he gets guys involved. But Elijah Moore and Corey Davis have been non-existent for fantasy football. So this week here, with a tough matchup and those factors, they're sit. And now to the Bills side of things, Stephon Diggs, top 3 in fantasy points this season at the wide receiver position. He's a stud. You start him each and every week. Gabe Davis, pretty much he's been a bust this season. And to be honest, he was a guy who was big on coming into the year. You figured in an offense with Josh Allen where they throw the football 30, 40 times per game, that Gabe Davis could be a number 2 great receiver for fantasy football in this Bill team. But that just hasn't come to fruition. He's had a couple pop games here and there, but this week versus a pretty stout Jet defense, he's a sit. And Isaiah McKenzie's been a better option than Gabe Davis over the last few weeks here. And he's a borderline option. He's a red zone target. And he's a matchup nightmare in the slot for some defenses. I got McKenzie borderline this week. Now to the Philadelphia Eagles at the New York Giants. A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. I know some weeks these guys don't do anything, but then there's some weeks they have that big ball game, and you can't afford to have these players on your bench. So this week here versus a mediocre Giant and banged up Giant secondary, I both got them as starts. This Philly team riding high, no pun intended, 11-1 on the season, most likely going to go 12-1 in this ball game. And Jalen Hurts, he's just getting his big playmakers involved pretty much week in and week out. And Brown and Smith's a start in this one. Now to the Giants, Darius Slayton, he's been a solid number 1 for this Giant team, even though, you know, he's not really a number 1, but this Giant team's had problem with wide receiver. Now, over the last 3 or 4 seasons, Kenny Galladay's been a bust. Kadarius Toney, they traded away. And Slayton pretty much was the last man standing. So this week here, just on volume alone, as a number 3 wide receiver or flex option, I got him as a start. Richie James Jr., he's a guy you really can't count on. He's a small wide receiver, a slot type of guy, even though he's been getting work, obviously, in this offense for this Giant team. But this week here versus a solid Eagle unit, I have him as a sit. Now to the Cleveland Browns at the Cincinnati Bengals. Amari Cooper, he's been a good player at home than he's been on the road, but he's still the number 1 man over here in Cleveland. Second game now for Deshaun Watson. I know he's very rusty last week, but I think this week here could get things on track. And let's see what Deshaun Watson has. So this week here, I think Amari Cooper's a start. And to Donovan Peoples-Jones had a pretty good week last week, including a return touchdown, which obviously is 6 points in most fantasy leagues. He's a borderline option. This offense looked out of sync. The Cincinnati Bengal team, they've been on a tear of late as well, including beating the Kansas City Chiefs for the 3rd time in Joe Burrow's career, 3-0. So right now, Cooper and Peoples-Jones, they might be decent options, but I think Cooper's the more safer bet with his, obviously, possession receiving work, where Donovan Peoples-Jones is more of a deeper play and a guy who's a deep ball threat more than a route runner like Cooper. Now to the Bengals, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Start these guys each and every week. They're stud wide receivers. Chase last week looked like he didn't miss a beat. I know it wasn't the greatest of games, but he still had a 16-point fantasy day. And Tyler Boyd, he just hasn't done much. And last week, he dropped a touchdown with the ball hitting off his helmet. No one within 10 yards of him, and he dropped it. So Tyler Boyd, I can't trust him. With Chase back now, You're not going to play him each and every week. Now to the Chiefs at the Broncos. Juju Smith-Schuster, he's been a great pickup for this Kansas City Chiefs team. And he's a guy you pretty much lock him in as a number 2 wide receiver flex option each and every week for your fantasy team. And once again, this week he's a start. Valdez-Scantling, it's one good week, one bad week. I just can't trust him. And to be honest, there's no one on this team besides Kelsey and Juju Smith-Schuster in the past game that I would trust. So Valdez-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, who's hurt with the hamstring injury, I don't trust. And Sky Moore, he really hasn't done anything. I can't trust him either. So he's a sit. Now to the Broncos, Courtland Sutton. I know he's banged up. He's questionable for this game. But if he does play in this game, Sutton, he's a guy I'm going to start because someone's going to have to catch the ball. And pretty much this season, it's been Sutton and Greg Dulcich as the only 2 decent options for Russell Wilson and this horrible Denver Bronco passing offense. So right here, Sutton I would start. They're going to play catch-up in this one. Even though the Broncos last week, I'll give their defense a lot of credit. They held down the Ravens all the way to the very end to 3 points until they scored with a minute left in that ball game. So right now, Jerry Jeudy, he's back as well. But he's been a bust once again, and the injuries have been a problem. So Judy's a sit in this one. Now to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the 49ers. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I know it hasn't been pretty this season here, but these are guys as well, just like the Philadelphia Eagle wide receivers. These are guys you got to just count on, and you got to put them out there in your starting lineup. I know some weeks it's only going to be 8-10 fantasy points for these guys, but then there's some weeks where they could go off and have a monster game. So Mike Evans, I know Monday Night Football, he didn't do much. I know Chris Godwin, he almost had a touchdown where he would have had a solid fantasy day, but he only had about 10-11 points in that one. But this week here, it's a game where I think they could be playing catch-up or they want to come out firing is Tom Brady in this Buc offense. And to be honest, I think this offense should come out with a more hurried-up scheme here to get defenses off guard. And that's where Tom Brady's at his best, getting his wide receivers in position in a 2-minute drill. So right now, Evans and Godwin I have as a start. Julio Jones, I know he's looked healthier over the last couple weeks and he's starting to make plays, but he's a sit for me. Deebo Samuel and Ayuk, even with Brock Purdy at starting quarterback, I still trust these guys to make plays. Purdy looked pretty decent, even I know last week in that matchup, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But right here, Brock Purdy's going to get the start. He was spreading the football out pretty well, and Deebo Samuel and Ayuk are good receivers and one of the best 1-2 combos in the league this season. So this week here in a big Week 14 matchup, I think these guys, you just got to go out there and you put them in their starting lineup because they've been consistent. And even with Purdy a quarterback, I think they could get things done. Now to the Panthers at the Seahawks. DJ Moore, I think he's got fantasy relevancy once again with Sam Darnold at quarterback, because last season he did a good job, DJ Moore, for fantasy football owners with Sam Darnold at quarterback. This season with Baker Mayfield, they didn't do anything. The Panthers had enough of him. They cut him loose. So he had a couple decent games with P.J. Walker, and then Baker Mayfield came back for one game. He didn't do nothing with him. And then Sam Darnold back, and he scored a touchdown a couple weeks ago. So DJ Moore is a third receiver flex option to start. Terrace Marshall, haven't seen enough out of him to garner much fantasy value or a guy to put in your lineup. He's a sit. And out to the Seahawks, Metcalf and Lockett, one of the best 1-2 combos as well in the league here. There's a few of them, obviously. Waddle, Hill, Lockett, Metcalf, Ayuk, Samuel, Evans, Godwin. So these guys, you start them each and every week. Geno Smith playing great football, one of the better fantasy quarterbacks this season here. And you roll them out there versus a pretty mediocre to poor defense like the Panthers. And out to the Dolphins at the Los Angeles Chargers, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle I'm going to start this week here. I know Waddle's banged up, but if he plays, these guys are must-starts each and every week. Tua is moving the football. I know Tua might not play in this game, and it's either Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson that going to start. But I think Tua mans it out. He plays in this game, and we know the Dolphins are in for the playoff hunt here, so they need this game after last week. The Niners blew the doors off of them late in the fourth quarter. And out to the Chargers side of things, Keenan Allen, he's a start for me each and every week. I know last week he got a lot of targets and he didn't do much till the end where he got a crazy 35-yard touchdown in the back of the end zone, but he's a good receiver, and it's only been health that's been the issue with him. As long as he plays, he's a guy you start each and every week, and we'll see if Mike Williams could suit up in a crucial ball game here for the Los Angeles Chargers. So right now, if Williams plays, he's a start. And Joshua Palmer, he's been a solid number 3 wide receiver this season for fantasy owners. But this week here, if obviously Mike Williams comes back, he's a borderline option at best. And DeAndre Carter last week, after coming off of 2 good weeks in a row, he put in a dud performance with only 2 fantasy points. So he's borderline this week as well. Now to the next ball game and Monday Night Football game. Final game of the week, New England Patriots at the Arizona Cardinals. So right here, Jakobi Meyers, I know the last couple weeks it hasn't been that good for him. Banged up with the shoulder versus Minnesota on Thanksgiving night. And then last week he didn't do anything in Jakobi Meyers, where he had a solid matchup. So this week here, I'm going to go with him one more time. Is Meyers as a start. He's the number one wide receiver and the only guy who's really a big playmaker besides Ramondre Stevenson on this New England Patriot offense. He's a start. And Devontae Parker and Aguilar, I know they're catching some passes. I know they're getting some work and they're in there a lot of snaps per game. But right now they're guys I obviously can't count on, and especially in a crucial Week 14. I have him as sits, and out of Hopkins and Hollywood Brown, these are two dynamic wide receivers. Brown, he's pretty much almost 100%, especially coming off a bye week now. So I'm going to start both these guys in this ball game. And Kyler Murray, he just has to get things going. And I think this week here, even though it's a pretty tough matchup on paper versus the New England Patriots, I think he could get things going for these two wide receivers. And I got him as starts. And Rondé Moore, he's not 100%. He's banged up, but I imagine coming out of the bye week, he's a guy that's going to play in this ball game. But either way, I just can't trust him with these two wide receivers back getting most of the targets, and Murray running the football a lot with James Conner as well. So I'll have him as a sits. That's wide receiver start sit Week 14 every matchup of the fantasy football season.